My family laughed when I helped an elderly neighbor, but her gift made me a millionaire. Growing up in a small town outside Chicago, everyone knew everyone. It was a kind of place where neighbors still borrowed sugar from each other, gossip spread faster than the wind, and people judged you based on what truck you drove. Church parking lots doubled as car dealerships on Sundays, and if you weren't driving something American-made, people looked at you like you had personally insulted the flag. It was a place where Friday night football was religion, where high school glory days never really ended, and where last names mattered more than resumes. For as long as I could remember, I always felt like the extra piece in a puzzle that didn't quite fit. My parents, Robert and Donna, had this unwavering pride in my older brother, Michael. He was a golden boy, the star athlete, the one who could do no wrong, the one who always had our parents' full attention. He walked into a room, and people noticed. I could have set myself on fire in the middle of the living room, and they'd probably just remind me not to ruin the carpet. I wasn't a bad kid. I got decent grades, stayed out of trouble, and worked my butt off, but it never seemed to be enough. When Michael turned 18, my parent handed him the keys to a brand-new Ford F-150, complete with all the bells and whistles. It was the kind of truck that turned heads in town, the kind of truck that made a statement. I was 16 at the time, and I remember standing there, watching as he climbed in, grinning like he had just won the lottery. That moment stuck with me, not just because of the truck, but because of what it symbolized. He was their pride and joy. I was just there. 2 years later, when I turned 18, there was no brand new truck waiting for me in the driveway. No surprise gift, no celebratory moment. Instead, my parent handed me an envelope with a birthday card and a $20 lottery ticket inside. I forced a smile, pretended I didn't care, and told myself it didn't matter. But it did. It always did. I had to be practical. Instead of waiting for handouts that were never going to come, I saved every dime I earned and bought a used Toyota Corolla. It was far from impressive. Faded paint, a crack in the windshield, and a radio that worked only when it felt like it. But it got me where I needed to go. More importantly, it was mine. I paid for it. I maintained it, and I took pride in that. But, of course, to my family, it was just another reason to remind me how different I was from Michael. Toyota? What? You gonna start making sushi too? My dad had laughed when he saw it. You should have gotten yourself a real car. I bit my tongue and let it slide. It was easier that way. That was the narrative of my life. I was wasting time, wasting potential, wasting energy. It didn't matter that I was working 2 jobs just to put myself through college, that I was juggling shifts at the local supermarket during the day and grinding through long nights at the diner. Michael, on the other hand, had his tuition covered, courtesy of my parents, and drove around in that shiny F-150 like he owned the town. To him, I was a little brother who just couldn't keep up. He'd toss me a pitying look whenever he saw me in my apron, serving fries to kids who used to sit behind us in homeroom. Rough night? He'd ask, leaning against his truck, sipping on some overpriced energy drink like he had all the time in the world. I told myself it didn't bother me, that I didn't care about their approval. But deep down I did. I wanted them to see me, to recognize that I was doing something meaningful. I wanted to matter. Most nights, after finishing my shift at the diner, I'd collapse into bed, exhausted, only to wake up a few hours later and do it all over again. It was a never-ending cycle. Work, school, sleep, repeat. My life felt like a conveyor belt, moving at full speed while I was barely hanging on. I couldn't even remember the last time I had a full weekend off. But despite the exhaustion, despite the constant reminder that I wasn't Michael, I held on to one thought. One day, things would change. One day, I'd prove them all wrong. I just had no idea how soon that day would come. The more I tried to make something of myself, the more it felt like my family saw me as nothing more than a walking joke. I worked 2 jobs, paid for my own classes, and somehow none of it ever seemed to count. In my dad's eyes, hard work only mattered if it came with a fat paycheck. And since I wasn't out there climbing some corporate ladder or making big money, I was just wasting my time. The jabs never stopped. Every time I mentioned something good I was trying to do, my dad had a way of twisting it into a joke. Like the time I helped Mrs. Johnson, the old lady who lived 3 houses down. She was pushing 90, barely able to get around, and her front steps were falling apart. I spent a weekend patching them up just to make sure she wouldn't trip and take a bad fall. When I casually mentioned it at dinner, hoping maybe, just maybe, I'd get some kind of acknowledgement, my dad just smirked and shook his head. Yeah? And did she pay your rent for your trouble? I ignored it. That was always the best strategy. But he wasn't done. You keep spending time on stuff like that, and one day you're going to wake up broke, wondering why nobody's handing you a medal for being such a nice guy. Michael laughed, and my mom gave one of those half-hearted sighs that meant she wasn't going to step in. I just kept eating, staring at my plate, pretending the food was suddenly the most interesting thing in the world. It was always the same routine. Say something, get laughed at, regret saying anything in the first place. Things escalated a week later when Mrs. Johnson needed help picking up supplies for some repairs inside her house. She offered to pay me, but I told her I'd do it for free. The problem? My Corolla wasn't exactly built for hauling anything heavier than a couple of grocery bags, and she needed some bulky materials. I figured, since my brother's F-150 was literally designed for stuff like this, I'd ask to borrow it. Big mistake. Dad didn't just say no. He laughed, this deep, chest-rumbling laugh, like I had just asked him for the keys to a private jet. You want to play handyman for some old lady? Be my guest. But don't expect to do it with my truck. Matter of fact, why don't you just move in with her? Seems like you care more about helping strangers than your own family. Michael, of course, had the time of his life with that one. Yeah, man, maybe she'll leave you her house in the will. Hope you like doilies. I swallowed down whatever comeback was sitting on the tip of my tongue and turned to my mom, hoping she'd at least be reasonable. But she just sighed and shook her head, like she agreed with him but didn't have the energy to argue. Your father's right. We all have responsibilities here. You got a roof over your head, food on your plate. Maybe it's time you start contributing more to this family instead of running off to help everybody else. Contributing more? I already covered all my own expenses. I didn't ask them for money, didn't rely on them for anything. Meanwhile, Michael was still getting checks from them for his rent, insurance, and whatever else he needed. But somehow, I was the one who needed to do more. We're not saying you have to pay for everything, my mom continued, her voice almost sweet. Just a little something to help out. A portion of your paycheck. Nothing crazy. I looked at her, then at my dad. They were serious. They wanted me to start handing over a cut of my barely there income to cover family expenses. The same family that had never once helped me with tuition, car payments, or even a pack of ramen when I was short on cash. I gripped my fork, so tight my knuckles turned white. I wanted to tell them how insane it was. How unfair. But I knew how that conversation would end. Me being told I was ungrateful, that I didn't appreciate everything they had done for me. So I just nodded. And the moment dinner was over, I went to my room and shut the door behind me, feeling more alone in that house than ever before. Lying on my bed, staring at the ceiling, I could hear Michael downstairs, laughing with Dad about something. Probably me, the golden boy, the pride and joy. I had no idea what I was going to do next, but one thing was crystal clear. I couldn't keep living like this. After that dinner, something in me snapped. I had spent years swallowing their words, ignoring their jabs, pretending it didn't get to me. But sitting in my room, staring at the walls of a house that had never really felt like home, I knew I was done. I wasn't going to beg for their approval anymore. The next morning, I woke up early and left before my dad or Michael could start on me again. I had a rare day off from the diner, and instead of spending it locked in my room avoiding them, I decided to do something productive. That's how I ended up at Mrs. Johnson's house. Mrs. Johnson had been living in the neighborhood longer than I had been alive. She was one of those people who always had a fresh pitcher of iced tea ready for guests, who knew everyone's business but never in a nosy way, and who made the best banana bread I had ever tasted. Her husband had passed away about 10 years ago, and since then, she had mostly kept to herself. The house, once one of the nicest on the block, had started to show its age. Peeling paint, overgrown bushes, and now, after last week's storm, a busted fence. When I knocked on her door, she greeted me with the kind of warm smile I rarely got at home. She looked me up and down and shook her head. "Jacob, dear, what on earth are you doing up this early on your day off? Shouldn't you be sleeping in like every other young person?" I told her I figured she could use some help with her fence, and for a moment, she just looked at me, eyes softening like she wasn't used to people offering anymore. Then she laughed, told me I was too kind, and insisted I come inside for some tea before we got started. Helping her felt good. There was no judgment, no backhanded comments, no feeling like I had to prove anything. Just honest work, and someone who actually appreciated it. I spent most of the morning pulling out the broken wooden panels and clearing out the debris. She sat on the porch, sipping her tea and telling me stories about the town back in the day, how she and her husband had built that fence themselves, how they used to host barbecues every summer before life got quieter. By midday, I was covered in dirt and sweat, but for the first time in a while, I didn't feel exhausted. I felt useful. Then, of course, I had to go home. I walked to the front door, and immediately I knew I had made a mistake. My dad was sitting in his chair, arms crossed, watching some sports channel like he was waiting for me. Michael was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, smirking like he already knew whatever was about to happen wasn't going to go in my favor. "So," Dad said, muting the TV, "where you been all day?" I told him. Big mistake. His face twisted like I had just told him I had spent the afternoon setting money on fire. He let out one of those dry chuckles, the kind that usually came right before an insult. "You spent the whole day fixing some old woman's fence? You serious?" I stood there, gripping the straps of my backpack, already regretting not just sneaking in and going straight to my room. He shook his head, leaned forward like he was about to deliver some life-changing wisdom. "You want to be useful? How about you start pulling your weight around here, instead of wasting time on some woman who ain't got nothing to do with you? Maybe she can afford to sit around all day, but you sure as heck can't." Michael, of course, jumped in. "Dude, she got you working for free? What, you applying to be her new grandson or something?" I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. I knew if I said anything back, it would just give them more fuel. But then Dad said something that made my stomach drop. "Heck, if you like playing handyman over there so much, why don't you just move in with her? Save us the trouble of feeding another mouth around here." Michael laughed. My mom, sitting at the dining table, didn't even look up from her phone. Just another night in the perfect family. I should have just let it slide. I should have gone to my room, ignored them like I always did. But something inside me snapped. I turned, walked straight up the stairs, and started throwing things into my duffel bag. Clothes, charger, whatever I could grab. I could hear Michael laughing downstairs. Could hear my dad muttering something about me getting dramatic. By the time I was back at the front door, they had finally realized I wasn't joking. My dad sat forward, eyebrows raising slightly. "Where the heck do you think you're going?" I didn't even look at him. I just opened the door, stepped outside, and slammed it shut behind me. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a place to go. But I sure as heck knew one thing. I wasn't coming back. The air outside was colder than I expected. Or maybe it just felt that way because I had nowhere to go. My breath fogged up in front of me as I walked down the sidewalk, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder, hands shoved deep into my pockets. I didn't have a plan. I told myself I'd figure out, maybe sleep in my car for a night or two, crash on a friend's couch if I could find someone willing. But standing out there, under the dim glow of the streetlights, reality hit hard. I had nowhere that really felt like mine. That's when I heard her voice. "Jacob, dear, what on earth are you doing out here so late?" I turned to see Mrs. Johnson standing on her porch, a warm light spilling out from behind her. She had a thick cardigan draped over her shoulders and held a steaming cup of tea in her hand, like she had just been getting ready to turn in for the night. I must have looked pretty pathetic because her expression immediately shifted from curiosity to concern. She didn't even wait for me to answer, just waved me over like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Come inside before you turn into a popsicle. You look like you could use a hot meal." I hesitated for half a second, but my stomach made the decision for me. I hadn't eaten since lunch, and at this point, pride wasn't worth going hungry. Her house smelled like cinnamon, old books, and something baking in the oven, probably her famous banana bread. It wasn't fancy, no shiny new appliances or designer furniture, but was warm, clean, and filled with little things that made it feel lived in. A quilt draped over the couch, family photos in mismatched frames, stacks of crossword puzzle books on the coffee table. The kind of place that made you feel like you belonged, even if you weren't sure where you belonged anymore. She didn't ask any questions right away. Just led me to the kitchen, sat me down, and placed a bowl of homemade chicken and dumplings in front of me. I hadn't even realized how hungry I was until I took the first bite. It was simple, just like something a grandma would make, but it might have been the best thing I'd ever tasted. She waited until I was halfway through the bowl before finally speaking. Are you going to tell me what's going on, or do I have to guess? I stared down at my food, suddenly not as hungry. I didn't know where to start. Saying out loud felt embarrassing, but the words tumbled out before I could stop them. I told her everything. About how my family never took me seriously, how they mocked me for helping people, how my dad basically told me to get lost. I kept my voice even, like I was just stating facts, but somewhere in the middle of it, my throat got tight, and I had to stop for a second. She didn't interrupt, didn't say anything like, I'm sure they meant well, or family is family. She just listened. When I finally stopped talking, she nodded like she had just confirmed something she already suspected. Well, Jacob, sound to me like you got more sense than they do. I let out a breath I didn't even realize I had been holding. She took a sip of her tea and set the mug down with a decisive little thud. Tell you what, I could use a little extra help around here. My knees aren't what they used to be, and this house isn't going to fix itself. I've got a spare room that's been gathering dust for years. You can stay here for as long as you need while you figure things out. No rent, no strings. Just good company and an extra set of hands when I need 'em. I blinked at her, not sure if I had heard that right. Don't look so surprised, she chuckled. Not every good deed has to come with a price. For the first time in a long time, I felt something loosen in my chest. Like maybe I wasn't completely alone in this world. Like maybe, just maybe, I had finally found a place where I didn't have to prove myself to be worth keeping around. I nodded, still half in shock. All right then, she said, standing up. Now, finish that soup before it gets cold. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. I picked up my spoon and took another bite, letting the warmth settle in my stomach. For the first time in years, I actually felt at home. Finding a place to live wasn't as easy as I thought it would be. Turns out, people don't exactly line up to rent to a guy with no solid rental history and a paycheck that barely covered the basics. Every listing I found was either way out of my budget or had enough red flags to make me think twice. One place smelled like someone had been keeping wild animals inside. Another had a landlord who insisted on being called Big Tony. Yeah, that was a pass. I was starting to get nervous, but Mrs. Johnson kept telling me not to rush. The right place will come along when it's opposed to, she'd say, like the universe had a real estate agent working behind the scenes just for me. She wasn't wrong. After a few days of searching, I finally found something, an old house that had been converted into apartments. The setup wasn't glamorous, but it was cheap. 3 bedrooms, a shared kitchen and bathroom, and a monthly rent of $300. The other 2 guys who lived there were about my age. One worked night shifts at a warehouse. The other was finishing up trade school. They seemed decent enough, and most importantly, they didn't care that I was barely scraping by. The guy from the warehouse even gave me his Wi-Fi password in exchange for me picking up his Amazon packages when he was at work. I signed the lease that same afternoon and moved my stuff in the next day. It wasn't much, just a duffel bag, a few thrift store dishes, and a second-hand mattress I managed to snag for cheap. My bed frame was a stack of milk crates I found behind the grocery store. Not exactly a dream setup, but it was mine. Living on my own, or at least outside my parents' house, felt surreal. For the first time, I could come home without bracing myself for another lecture. No one questioned where I had been, what I was doing, or why I wasn't pulling my weight. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but I wasn't complaining. Still, No matter how much I settled into my new place, I kept finding myself back at Mrs. Johnson's. It wasn't even intentional at first. One day, I was at the grocery store when I saw a sale on her favorite brand of tea. Before I even thought about it, I grabbed a box and headed to her house to drop it off. That turned into fixing a leaky faucet the next week, then helping her rearrange some furniture, then replacing a light fixture. Before I knew it, stopping by became part of my routine. She never asked me to come, but she always had a fresh plate of cookies or a pot of coffee waiting when I did. One evening, as I was patching up a drafty window in her living room, she sighed and looked around the house like she was seeing it differently. I suppose I should tell you, I'm selling the place. I nearly dropped the screwdriver in my hand. She nodded. My sister-in-law has been asking me to move down to Florida for years. She's got a little farm, a big house, and honestly, I'm tired of these winters. Figure it's time. I sat back on my heels, trying to process it. The idea of her leaving hadn't even crossed my mind. This house, her house, had felt like the one stable thing in my life these past few weeks. The thought of it sitting empty or worse, someone else living in it, felt wrong. She must have seen something in my face because she reached over and patted my arm. Don't go looking so heartbroken now. It's a good thing. And besides, I'm not leaving tomorrow. I forced a smile and nodded, still gonna feel weird not stopping by. She chuckled. Well, you better visit, or I'll have to come all the way back just to knock some sense into you. As I was getting ready to leave that night, she disappeared into the back room for a moment and came back holding a small wooden box. It was old, the kind of thing that looked like it had been sitting on a shelf for decades. This was my husband's, she said, pressing it into my hands. He used to collect old coins, nothing fancy, just little things he picked up over the years. Always said they'd be worth something one day. I want you to have it. I started to protest, but she waved me off. Don't argue with an old woman, Jacob. Just take it. I took it, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone actually saw me, not as a burden, not as a disappointment, just as a person who mattered. I didn't know it yet, but that little box was about to change my life in ways I never could have imagined. After another long shift at the diner, I dragged myself back to my room, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the sagging mattress. The place still smelled vaguely like a mix of stale pizza and someone else's bad life choices. But for $300 a month, I wasn't in a position to be picky. I had the night off from the supermarket job, which meant I had an actual evening to myself, a rare luxury. So I did what any broke guy in his 20s does when he's too tired to move, but not tired enough to sleep. I fell into a YouTube rabbit hole. It started with one of those 10 everyday objects that could make you rich videos. Total clickbait. I wasn't expecting much. Just some guy telling me that Beanie Babies and first edition Pokemon cards could buy a house if I had the right ones. Spoiler, I didn't. But then the algorithm did its thing, and a video about rare coins popped up. Some collector was holding up a tiny, worn-out penny, going on about how it had sold at auction for something like $15,000. 15 grand. For a penny. That got my attention. I clicked on another video. Then another. Turns out, people pay absurd amounts of money for rare coins, especially ones from the 19th and early 20th centuries. Mint errors, misprints, limited releases, all kinds of little details could turn an ordinary-looking dime into a jackpot. And that's when I remembered the box. I sat up so fast my spine popped. Reaching under my bed, I pulled out the small wooden chest Mrs. Johnson had given me. I hadn't done much with it since she handed it over. At the time, it just felt like a sentimental gift, something her husband had collected for fun. But now, I was looking at it differently. The lid creaked as I flipped it open. Inside, the coins were stacked neatly, some in little paper sleeves, others loose and jingling together. I grabbed a handful and spread them out on my bedsheet. Most of them looked old, really old. I spotted a few with dates from the early 1900s, some even from the late 1800s. My heart started beating a little faster. Could any of these be worth something? I picked up my phone and started searching. At first, it was hard to tell what I was looking at. I wasn't exactly a coin expert, and there were way too many variations. But then I found an online forum where people posted pictures of their finds, asking collectors to help identify them. I snapped a few quick pictures and made a post. Didn't expect much. Maybe someone would tell me they were neat but worthless, and that would be the end of it. But within minutes, my phone started buzzing. The first comment was casual. Nice set. A couple of those might be interesting. Can you show close-ups of the dates? So I did. I posted clearer pictures, focusing on some of the older ones. Then the replies started getting intense. Dude, where'd you get these? That's silver dollar. If it's legit, you're sitting on serious money. You might want to get those appraised. Some of these look like they could be worth thousands. Thousands. I swallowed hard, my fingers suddenly unsteady as I picked up one of the coins they were freaking out about. It didn't look all that special to me, just an old, slightly worn silver dollar. But according to the forum, certain ones from this era were incredibly rare. One guy even sent a link to an auction house where a similar coin had sold for over $5,000. My brain short-circuited. $5,000 for one coin, and I had nearly 100 in this box. I sat there, staring at the little metal discs in front of me, my whole life flashing before my eyes. Had I just been handed a fortune without even realizing it? I didn't know for sure yet, but one thing was certain. I needed to find out, and fast. Holding on to the box of coins felt different now. What I had assumed was just an old collection suddenly felt like a lottery ticket I hadn't scratched off yet. But before I got ahead of myself, I needed to be smart about this. I wasn't about to roll into a pawn shop and let someone lowball me out of desperation. I spent the next few days researching, watching more videos, and reading forums. Turns out, the antique world had a whole set of unspoken rules, and the last thing I wanted was to walk into a deal blind. After a ton of Googling, I found a well-reviewed antique shop about 30 minutes away. It wasn't one of those sketchy places with dusty shelves and a guy who looked like he was waiting for his next break. This place had real credibility. Local collectors swore by it, and the owner was known for fair deals. On Saturday morning, I packed up a small selection of coins, the ones that seemed valuable but weren't the rarest in the box. No way was I blowing my shot by dumping everything at once. I grabbed my keys and hit the road. The store was tucked between a boutique coffee shop and one of those yoga studios that smelled like eucalyptus. Inside, the place had a mix of old-school charm and museum vibes. Glass cases lined the walls, filled with everything from vintage baseball cards to Civil War artifacts. Behind the counter stood a man in his 60s, glasses perched on the tip of his nose, flipping through a catalog. He looked like someone who had spent decades buried in history books and had probably forgotten more about antiques than I'd ever learn. When I placed the coins on the counter, he barely looked up. Buying or selling? Selling, hopefully. That got his attention. He set the catalog down, adjusted his glasses, and started inspecting the coins with a kind of intensity that made my palms sweat. Minutes passed. He took out a magnifying glass, held a few of them up to the light, and even weighed one on a small scale. Finally, he looked up. Where'd you get these? I hesitated for half a second before settling on the truth. Mostly, a family friend gave them to me. They were her late husband's collection. He nodded slowly, eyes back on the coins. These are in remarkable condition. You got a mix of high silver content and rare mints. Some of these are highly sought after. You looking for cash or store credit? I almost laughed. Cash. Definitely cash. He smirked, like he had expected that answer. All right, let me run some numbers. More waiting. He pulled out a reference book, checked a few listings online, and finally, after what felt like an eternity, he scribbled something down on a notepad and turned it toward me. $25,000. I swear my heart stopped for a second. $25,000. I had walked in here with a shoebox of coins and was walking out with more money than I had ever seen in my life. I must have looked like I was in shock because he chuckled. Fair price. You can try to sell them individually at auction, but that's a slow game. This is cash today. I didn't even pretend to negotiate. I shook his hand, signed some paperwork, and within 15 minutes, I was holding a check that felt like it might catch fire in my hands. Driving home, I kept checking the passenger seat like the check might disappear. It didn't feel real. That night, I sat at my tiny kitchen table and did something I never thought I'd do. I made a financial plan. First, I paid off a chunk of my college debt. $5,000 gone, just like that. Knowing I didn't have to stress about that much interest piling up felt like I had just dropped a 50-pound weight off my back. Next, I took care of some essentials. My laptop was practically being held together by duct tape and prayers, so I finally upgraded. Having a functional computer meant I could pick up better-paying freelance gigs online, instead of scraping by on late-night shifts. I even let myself have one splurge. Nothing crazy, just a decent second-hand leather jacket. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't buying something out of necessity. I was buying something because I wanted it. Sitting there, looking at my new laptop, and knowing my debts weren't swallowing me whole, something clicked. For the first time ever, I wasn't just surviving, I was in control. And that feeling, that was worth more than any amount of money. Selling that first batch of coins was just the beginning. Once I realized just how much money was sitting in that wooden box, I knew I couldn't just cash everything in at once. That would be the fastest way to tank my chances of making the most out of this. So I got strategic. I spent weeks researching the market, watching auctions, and tracking the prices of rare coins. Turns out, the collector's world was just as unpredictable as the stock market. Prices spiked and dipped depending on trends, condition, and demand. If I wanted to maximize my profits, I had to sell them in small batches, making sure I wasn't flooding the market with too many of the same type at once. It was slow, but it worked. Every time I sold a handful of coins, I got better at negotiating. I learned which buyers were serious, who was trying to lowball me, and when to walk away from a bad deal. Over the course of a year, the numbers kept climbing, $50,000, then $200,000, then $500,000. By the time I had sold the most valuable ones, I had raked in over $8 million. $8 million. I went from counting quarters for gas money to checking my investment accounts like some Wall Street guy. And yet, despite the insane numbers, I wasn't about to go blow it all on luxury cars and pointless junk. I had spent too many years scraping by to be reckless now. Instead, I started thinking bigger. One night, while sitting in my tiny apartment, I realized I finally had a chance to do something that actually mattered. Not just for me, but for other people too. I kept thinking about Mrs. Johnson, about how hard it was for her to get groceries on her own, about all the elderly folks in town who probably struggle with the same thing. And not just them, how many people work crazy hours and barely had time to shop or food. That's when the idea hit me. A local grocery delivery service. Sure, big cities had companies that did this, but my town? Not a chance. The closest thing we had was that one guy who offered to bring you fast food for an extra $5. If I could make it easy for people to get their groceries without having to leave their homes, I knew there was a market for it. I started small, built a simple website, printed out some flyers, and spread the word. At first, it was just me, my Corolla, and a notebook full of orders. I'd take calls, go to the store, pick up what people needed, and drop it off at their doors. Nothing fancy, but it worked. The response was better than I expected. Within a few weeks, I had so many orders that I had to start turning people away. I hired 2 part-time drivers to help with deliveries, then another. By the end of the year, I had a small fleet of cars and a growing team handling orders all over town. I even partnered with a few local grocery stores, which meant I got discounts on bulk purchases and could pass those savings on to my customers. The business wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. The money started rolling in fast. What had begun as a way to keep myself busy had turned into a full-blown operation, pulling in thousands a week. And the best part? I was providing something people actually needed. I wasn't just some kid struggling to make ends meet anymore. I was building something real. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for things to get better. I was making them better. Success changes a lot of things. But one thing doesn't change: people will only see you as a resource. I had been keeping my business and finances low-key, mostly because I didn't want the attention. My name wasn't making headlines. I wasn't flexing on social media, and I sure wasn't out there bragging about my bank account. But small towns have a way of making everything public. It started with whispers. A former co-worker from the supermarket ran into me at the coffee shop and did a double take when I pulled up in my brand new SUV. Guess those delivery tips really add up, huh? Then came the stares. My old Corolla had been eyesore in the diner parking lot for years, but now my sleek, fully loaded ride stood out like a sore thumb. People noticed, and when people notice, they talk. And then the phone call started. First, it was Michael, the guy who had spent years making fun of me for working dead-end jobs, calling me a waste of time, suddenly had a change of heart. He opened with small talk. How's life? How's the business? Let's catch up? But it didn't take long before he got to the real reason he was calling. Man, I was thinking family sticks together, right? And, times are kind of tough for me right now. The truck's acting up, rent's been rough. Maybe you could help out a little? I let the silence drag on. Just a loan, he added quickly. Nothing crazy. I mean, come on. You're doing great now. It's not like you'd even miss it. Right. The same brother who got a brand new truck for his birthday, while I got a scratch-off ticket, was suddenly playing the family card. I told him no. Politely. He didn't take it well. Next came my parents. Dad's tone wasn't nearly as sweet. You think you did this all on your own, he snapped. Who raised you? Who put food on your plate? You owe this family. It's time you showed some gratitude. Mom tried the guilt trip angle. We just want to be part of your life. Honey, families support each other. It's only fair. Fair, right? Because it had always been so fair when Michael got everything handed to him while I worked double shifts just to keep up. I told him no, too. That's when things got ugly. Michael left a string of messages about how I was selfish, how I had forgotten where I came from. Dad's next call was full of threats, talking about how he'd tell everyone in town I had cheated my way to the top, whatever that meant. They even threw in some vague legal threats, as if I had done something wrong by working hard and making smart decisions. For a second, I almost felt bad. Years of conditioning will do that to you. But then I reminded myself, these were the same people who had mocked me, dismissed me, and pushed me aside the second I didn't fit into their vision of success. Now that I was successful, they suddenly want a seat at the table. The funniest part? They didn't even ask how I was doing. Not once. I wasn't playing their game anymore. So I blocked their numbers. Let them gossip. Let them spin whatever stories they wanted. I had built my future without them, and I wasn't about to let them tear it down now. And for the first time, I realized walking away hadn't just been the best decision of my life. It had been the only decision. Cutting off my family wasn't easy. No matter how toxic they had been, there was still that voice in the back of my head. The one that had spent years trying to earn their approval, trying to prove that I was worth something. But after that last phone call, after hearing my dad throw around guilt trips and my brother whining about how life wasn't fair, I knew there was nothing left to save. So I did what they never expected. I walked away. For good. The first thing I did was sell off the last of the rarest coins. I had held on to them, partly because they were the most valuable and partly because a small, sentimental part of me felt like they were my safety net. But I didn't need a safety net anymore. I needed a fresh start. Between those final sales and the money my business was pulling in, I had more than enough to make a serious move. And if I was leaving my old life behind, I was doing it right. So I packed up, found a buyer for my house, and bought a place in Texas, somewhere warm, somewhere with a booming economy, and most importantly, somewhere far away from the people who had spent years making me feel like I'd never be enough. Moving felt surreal. I went from a tiny apartment in my hometown to a sleek, modern house in a city where nobody knew my past. No one saw me as that kid who worked at the supermarket. Here, I was just another entrepreneur, another guy making things happen. And business? It exploded. Expanding my delivery service into a major city meant a bigger customer base, more demand, and way more opportunities. Within months, I had a proper office, a full team, and partnerships with local grocery chains that helped streamline operations. What started as a one-man hustle had turned into a company that was actually making a name for itself. I met people who respected me, not because of some imaginary family obligation, but because of the work I had put in. I built friendships with people who had the same drive, the same hunger to create something meaningful. And the best part? I didn't know anything to anyone. Well, almost anyone. I kept in touch with Mrs. Johnson. She had finally moved to Florida, living the quiet, comfortable life she deserved. We talked every now and then, mostly short calls where she'd ask if I was eating enough and remind me not to work myself into the ground. I sent her care packages, her favorite teas, small things that I knew would make her smile. And every time we talked, I thought about how different my life might have been if I had never helped her fix that fence. One evening, I was closing up the office when I got a text from an unknown number. "Jacob, I heard about your success. Hope you remember where you came from. Call me." No name, but I need one. I stared at the screen for a long minute. Then I blocked the number. I wasn't the same person I had been back then. I had built something real, something I was proud of, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone's approval but my own. I was finally free.